emergency.
I just heard somebody being sacked. My window's open and I just heard a woman screaming help, basically, and then, like, massive whack.
I've just gone to the back door, she's laying there, and she's covered in blood. I don't know if she's alive or not. There's blood everywhere.
We've got an incident in Penygroes. It's come in as a 23-year-old, lying, covered in blood, not conscious, not breathing, and they've stated that she's got what looks like holes in her head.
Police confirmed that a body of a young woman had been found after they were called to the scene.
We didn't need a pathologist to tell us that she'd been the victim of a sustained attack.
Emma. Emma.
Built in the valleys of northern Wales lies the picturesque village of Penygroes.
Penygroes is an 88% Welsh-speaking village, and it's only got a population of about 1,800, so it's quite small. There's a couple of pubs there, there's a few sort of local amenities. Everyone really knows each other, and everyone is quite friendly with each other. It's not a particularly affluent area, and I think that drives people closer together. It's because it has been through hardship. People will chat to their neighbours in the street, and they'll be friendly with one another because they have that sense of almost camaraderie and sort of common spirit. In it together, definitely.
In the middle of the village lived aspiring equestrian Emma Baum.
She was funny, she was always laughing, she was happy, she was kind, she'd do anything for anyone.
She was always there for me, I was always there for her. If I broke up with somebody, she'd come over and spend a bit of time with me. We'd watch series after series after series, eat junk rubbish, just make each other laugh.
When Emma left school, she enrolled in an equine studies course at college and met friend Hayley.
She's just very bubbly. She's never like a down person or anything like that. There was one day in particular that I remember in college, and it was absolutely hailing it down. We were all trying to run from the bus shelter to the canteen to get our lunch, and she went before me and she went flying, then I went flying, and we both ended up on top of each other just in the canteen, like in front of her. It was the most embarrassing thing I think I've ever been through, but we just jumped up and just walked back to the queue like it had never happened.
As well as having a large friendship circle, Emma remained close to her mum, Amanda.
Emma's best friend was almost always her mum, Amanda. Amanda was always looking after Emma and always looking out for her as well. And I think Emma really appreciated that. There was a special bond between them.
And her and Emma were so close. They were very, very similar, actually. They were so alike.
While studying in England, Emma stayed close to her friends back home and fell pregnant by her childhood sweetheart, Davies.
When she found out she was pregnant, she quite quickly moved back home. I think because she wanted to be close to her mum, really, and be close to her family, and really her support network that she had. After having their son together, Emma and David were ready to start their own lives together, maybe their own chapter in North Wales, raising their son.
She was a good mum, really good mum. She'd always put her son first. She'd do anything for him, she'd take him everywhere, he was well looked after, like she'll take him from days out, she'd just go to all the baby clubs, stuff like that.
She was a very caring person and loved being a mum. It was everything to her.
The couple were besotted with their son, so when their relationship came to an end, they were focused on doing what was best for him.
Emma and David decided to sort of go their separate ways and sort of co-parent. There wasn't really any bad blood between them, and they got the balance right, and they were able to deal with it sort of very maturely at a young age.
Despite raising a son together, they both managed to live separate lives.
After they split, they both seemed to move on. They found other people while at the same time managing to co-parent fairly amicably.
Dave got with someone else, he was with a girl, and it all seemed normal.
And it wasn't long before Emma met someone too.
She started dating a lad in the village that I was living at the time.
She was really happy with him, and you could see that just by the way she was around him. So it was nice to see that she could find that happiness within someone else as well, and he was amazing with her son. Everything did seem fine, you wouldn't ever think there was ever a problem there.
But in the summer of 2016, everything changed.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
Hi, I think I just heard somebody being attacked. My window's open and I just heard a woman screaming help, basically, and then, massive whacks, somebody was, hitting something with it, a skateboard or something. And then she stopped.
All right, leave it with us. We'll get someone there as soon as we can do now.
At about 4 o'clock that morning, a number of witnesses had phoned through to North Wales Police reporting that they had heard some form of disturbance in the area of Emma's home address. Now, police officers did attend the area and they did patrol to see whether they could hear anything, but nothing was reported and they left the area.
But around 6 hours later, emergency services receive another call.
Ambulance, tell me exactly what's happened, please.
I've just arrived now. I was dropping off some shoes for my little boy, for my ex-partner. I've just gone to the back door. She's fucking laying there and she's covered in blood. I don't know if she's alive or not.
Okay, is she awake?
No, I don't think she's awake.
Okay, are you able to get close to her to check to see if she's awake?
Yeah, Emma.
Emma's ex, David, turns up to pick up their son, as had been arranged, but discovers the most appalling scene.
She's not responding at all, no? Okay. Can you get close to see if her chest is rising when she's breathing?
It's around, it's possible, please.
Okay, yes, yeah. Are you sitting down or standing up?
I'm sat next to her. There's holes in her head. There's blood everywhere.
Okay.
She's just laying here in the nightgown.
He was hysterical on the phone. He said she was quite severely injured, that there was blood all over her body.
I am organising help for you now.
Emma.
Do you need me to call anyone?
I'll give her mum a ring now.
Okay.
After he made the call to the police, he phoned Amanda, Emma's mother, told her that he had found Emma badly injured at the back of the address. Amanda attended the scene and what must have been absolutely horrendous for her, obviously saw the horrendous injuries that her daughter had sustained during what was a really vicious attack.
While Emma's mum desperately tries to save her daughter and performs CPR on her, emergency services rush to the scene.
Hiya, it's ambulance. Hiya. We've got an incident in Penygroes. It sounds suspicious.
Okay, and what is it that's going on there?
It's come in as a 23-year-old, lying, covered in blood, not conscious, not breathing, and they've stated that she's got what looks like holes in her head.
How far are you from scene?
We're about 7 minutes away.
Both police and paramedics arrive. They find Emma outside the rear door. They also try resuscitating her, but she is shortly pronounced dead at the scene.
Officers went there, they saw those injuries. It was clear, we didn't need a pathologist to tell us that she'd been the victim of a sustained attack, that she was the victim of a murder.
The village of Penygroes is now the centre of a shocking crime.
We had neighbours who were all curious and frightened, but the overwhelming sense was one of sort of shock, It is a cliche that they say this sort of thing doesn't happen here, but with villages like Penygroes, this thing really doesn't happen here.
But who would have committed this most atrocious of crimes? Who would want to harm this popular young mum?
I was obviously in a lot of shock as well. I couldn't quite believe what had happened.
In the beautiful mining village of Penygroes, the community is stunned at the news of the murder of 22-year-old mum, Emma Baum.
Her ex, David, had gone around, as they'd agreed, at about sort of 10:30 to pick up their son.
He'd gone to the address that morning with some clothes for the child, and he found the dead body of his ex-girlfriend outside the rear door of the address.
Immediately, a murder investigation is launched.
So the police officers made key decisions about preserving the scene around making a cordon that was large enough to ensure that you captured all the evidence, not only within the property, but on the outside of the property towards the rear of where Emma Baum's house was.
You only get one go at recovering evidence from a body, and one that is already compromised. There will be a lot of discussion about what should be sampled at the scene, what should be done at the scene, what is going to be compromised by another action. So there will be a lot of effort going into preserving as much evidence as possible.
News of the shocking crime spreads.
I got back and my whole street was all taped up and locked down. I wasn't allowed to go in there. I was phoning Emma flat out, and her phone was still ringing, so I thought, oh, it's not her, she's okay. And then, you know, they wouldn't let me in, so I found a way round. And then I could see her mum and everything in the back of the house, and I knew it was her. It didn't feel real. I was just thinking, like, it can't be real, you know, they can save her. But it was, she's already gone.
I got messages on Facebook of friends. I didn't believe it, didn't register. And then I got a call off Amanda. And, yeah, then, well, if somebody's mum's calling you to tell you that their daughter's dead, then kind of confirms it, doesn't it, really?
My friend rang me from Wales and she said, have you heard about Emma? And I went, no. Like, what do you mean, have I heard about Emma? Thinking she might have been in an accident. And I was like, no, that's not Emma. Like, that wouldn't have happened. And then I was ringing her mum, and her mum answered and told me, and her mum was absolutely devastated. And as you can imagine, like, I was in a lot of shock as well. But I couldn't quite believe what had happened because no one actually knew at the time.
With such a big story breaking in the close-knit village community, local journalist Tom Davidson is one of the first on the scene.
People are going to want to know what's going on. And then that's when we get the phone calls or the emails and get told something's going on here. I remember the scene being quite eerie. It just didn't look right. It almost looked incongruous to see that many police there in sort of what is a sort of stereotypical Welsh, sort of North Wales village, really. It's unnerving to see 6 police cars and an ambulance at the bottom of your street when that's not what you're expecting, you know, at all on a sort of a normal, otherwise ordinary normal morning.
As the investigation gets underway, police need to try to work out who would cause harm to Emma and why.
She was always locking, you know, always making sure she was locking the doors and stuff. She wouldn't answer the door in the night.
We think that potentially she'd been killed about 4 o'clock in the morning, so that the screams heard by members of the public who lived nearby were probably the screams of Emma. And several of those witnesses believe that they heard someone running at the rear of their address, and one person, in fact, actually saw the shadows of what she believed to be a male running away along a path at the rear of the murder scene.
Police need to act fast. So they search the scene for clues. But one thing jumps out. There's no sign of a forced entry, which leads detectives to speculate that Emma may have known her killer.
Actually, stranger murders, you know, don't happen that often at all. So it's usually someone that is known to the victim. So it's natural for a senior investigating officer to want to know exactly who her current partner is at this moment in time. Could that current partner have been involved?
So with the sort of screeching and screaming that had been reported by neighbours overnight, we, as a newsroom, thought at the time it was domestic.
And further information appears to cement police suspicions.
One witness actually believed they heard the name of a male being mentioned, and the name they thought they heard being shouted was Nathan. What was significant to us as the inquiry team is that Nathan was the current boyfriend of Emma Baum.
With this latest revelation, police immediately swarm on Emma's boyfriend's house.
He wasn't at his home address. He lived about 10 miles or so from the scene with his parents, but he wasn't there. And we did some inquiries and established that both his phone and his vehicle were travelling in mid-Wales. So was he trying to get away from the area? You know, could we lose vital evidence? The fact that he wasn't near the scene, the fact that his name had been shouted by a neighbour, obviously he became a person of interest to us and someone that we naturally needed to trace quite quickly. So many police officers went to look for that vehicle.
With the police on the hunt for Emma's boyfriend, they reach out to other forces around the country, and within hours, they have their man.
Nathan was later that day arrested on suspicion of being involved in the killing.
So we heard about an arrest fairly quickly afterwards. I think it was that day. And the police then they strain to say that it's an isolated incident. And as journalists, they might say, we're not looking for anyone else in connection, which means they think they got their guy.
Gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked. And I thought, there's no way it'll beat Nathan, like not a chance, like at all. You know, he was too much of a nice guy to be able to do something like that.
With Emma's boyfriend now in police custody, the clock is ticking to establish exactly what he was doing at the time of her murder.
He said, I wasn't in North Wales at the time in question. I travelled to Builthwells to the Royal Welsh Show, which happens every July here in Wales, and I got there on the Sunday afternoon. I remained there and I spent the evening with a number of friends and associates. We sought the assistance of the police in Dyfed-Powys, which is where the Royal Welsh Show takes place, and they took statements of numerous witnesses, all of which confirmed that he had spent the night in Builthwells. So effectively, Nathan had an alibi and was released from custody without charge.
With Emma's boyfriend ruled out of the investigation, police need to dig deeper into her life and turn to her distraught ex, David, who is a key witness having discovered her body. Can he help police piece together the days leading up to her death?
David said that he'd spent the previous evening at his girlfriend's address in Trevor. He said that his girlfriend went to bed earlier than he did, that he'd remained at the address throughout the evening.
David tells detectives he received a text message that night from Emma, asking if he could bring their son's shoes to the address the following day.
David said that he had retired to bed about 4 o'clock in the morning, that he had got up between 5 and 6 because he couldn't sleep, and he'd travelled with his girlfriend to a beach where they took the dog for a walk before subsequently returning back to their address. And then at about 10 o'clock, he sent a message to Emma's phone to say that he would be travelling very shortly over to her address. And indeed, we know that he attended the address just after 10:30 to find her body.
Emma. Emma.
David's story is quickly verified by his girlfriend, leaving detectives back at square one. Police have been unable to find a murder weapon at the scene, so hope rests on the post-mortem results. Could this offer clues as to how Emma was killed? With what? And by whom?
The cause of death in this case was given as head injuries. The significant findings were that there were multiple penetrating injuries, and they were entirely consistent with the use of the pointed end of a crowbar. With a crowbar, you will usually get more tearing of the skin rather than a clean cut, and you will often get bruising or grazing around the edges where relatively rough metal has passed through it.
A closer look at Emma's wounds reveal a multitude of injuries.
We would later discover that she had around about 20 head wounds.
This is not just a simple accident or a simple momentary action. It takes physical force to penetrate the skin, and if somebody else is causing those injuries, it takes time and effort. The scalp is very dense, the skull is very solid, but the brain is very soft. One heavy blow to the head is sufficient to kill somebody. 20 blows to the head, there can be no logical conclusion other than this assault was intended to kill.
I was like in shock. It wasn't like an irrational, oh my God, I've done it once and I've stopped. It was an accident. Like, it was a lot. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and in one, like a very directed personal kind of area as such, which was even more like, it just made me feel sick.
With no motive or suspect in custody, and the post-mortem suggesting this was a sustained attack with the sole intention of killing the victim, fear begins to spread across the local community.
People will fear the worst, and that's only natural. I suppose the thing they're fearing the most is that it isn't an isolated incident, because that's just human nature to think maybe there is something worse going on. They haven't caught the person who's done this, and, you know, you don't know, because at that stage, no one knows.
But on the 19th of July 2016, just one day after Emma's murder, things take a dramatic turn. 2 more people are arrested.
We want to find out, who have they arrested? Who is it who was a killer in our midst?
It's been 24 hours since 22-year-old mum, Emma Baum, was discovered murdered in her home in the Welsh village of Penygroes, and police have made 2 arrests.
When a community hears there's an arrest, I think there's an initial wave of relief. But then you start wondering who it is. And then you start wondering, have they got the right person? Have they arrested the right man or woman? Because you don't know. And no one knows, obviously.
In a matter of hours, police reveal the identities of their suspects.
Davies was arrested. He was cautioned, he was very calm, and he was taken to a police station in the Penygroes area here in Caernarfon. And his girlfriend was, in fact, also arrested on suspicion of perhaps being involved in the killing, or certainly assisting with the offender in the case.
And that's when our investigation takes on a whole new level, because we have a name, we can start looking into the background of him and Emma.
When police first spoke to Emma's ex and father of their son, David, just 24 hours previously as a witness, he had an alibi. But having taken a closer look into David and Emma's relationship, police uncover some disturbing information.
They were all right, you know, like any young couple, they have the ups and downs, but normally it's over silly things. Sometimes they'd break up, sometimes they'd be back on.
She seemed quite happy in a relationship, and then one day she just phoned me up and she was in tears on the phone.
He had cheated, they'd split, he'd quickly become sort of jealous, and she would try her best to cover for him at times.
And she told me basically everything that was going off, how she'd saved up for him to go to Magaluf or something on holiday. He came back with hickeys everywhere. He was using the house like a hotel, going out, sleeping with other women, coming back, running her down, making her feel bad about herself. She'd be sitting next to him and he'd be on Facebook messaging girls. And I think she'd just taken everything from her and destroyed her.
The couple eventually got back together, but friends started to take notice of David's unusual behaviour.
I went down there with my partner. He came in the back at one point, but was didn't say hi, hi, bye, very, very cold. And even my partner was like, blinking heck, like, what's wrong with him? And Emma was just like, oh, just ignore him. But you think, bloody hell, that's not do you know what I mean? That's not normal.
But while David messaged and hung out with other girls, it seems he started to become more controlling of Emma and stopped her from meeting up with her own friends.
She told me that due to her being a mother and Dave being the way he was, that we couldn't be friends anymore. We couldn't communicate, we couldn't spend time together, we couldn't talk to each other because of his jealousy of how close we were.
Being away from friends took its toll on Emma.
I'd seen her putting on weight. I'd seen her not putting on makeup. I'd seen her pretty much chain smoking. She was a shadow of herself. She was destroyed as a person. It was quite upsetting to see, obviously, somebody you care about and somebody you love greatly as a friend deteriorate in such a way.
The couple split up for good in January 2016 and agreed to share custody of their son. But despite the volatile nature of their relationship, it wasn't enough to suspect David for Emma's murder. So what had led to his arrest?
He said there must have been some mistake. It couldn't possibly be the case. He was interviewed and he stuck to the exact story that he'd provided the inquiries where he was treated as a witness.
David tells police that he was at his home in the village of Trevor around the time Emma was murdered.
He was at home playing on his Xbox and that he went to bed at about 4 o'clock before telling us he'd gone for a walk with a dog, before subsequently returning back to their address. And then at about 10 o'clock, he sent a message to Emma's phone to say that he would be travelling very shortly over to her address. And indeed, we know that he attended the address just after 10:30 to find her body.
I've just arrived now. I was dropping off some shoes for my little boy, for my ex-partner. I've just gone to the back door and she's fucking laying there and she's covered in blood. I don't know if she's alive or not. Emma, there's holes in her head. There's blood everywhere.
But police now had concerns about the true nature of David's relationship with Emma and decide to take a closer look at his movements on the morning she was murdered. And what they find is a game changer.
We also subsequently conducted telephony inquiries to establish where was David's phone during that night. Was it consistent with him being in Trevor? Or was it consistent with him being anywhere else? And what it found was that his phone, whilst in Trevor at about 2 o'clock in the morning, subsequently moved. His phone moved to the village of Penygroes, and his phone could not have been in Trevor at the time when Emma Baum was killed. How is it that your mobile phone was in the village of Penygroes during the early hours of the morning at the relevant time when the murder took place? Now, that completely changed the shape of our investigation.
And as forensic examinations continue, it isn't just David Davies' phone which places him near the scene on the night of the murder.
So as part of the inquiries, one thing we wanted to establish is whether there was a Wi-Fi router within the address of Emma Baum, because we wanted to find out exactly whose phone had connected to that router on the night of the murder. So we got a specialist team in to examine that router. And on the early hours of the following morning, we had a report from that specialist team to say that David Davies' phone had connected with that router at about 2:30 a.m. that morning. Not only did the phone move, but his phone got so close a proximity to Emma's home address is that it connected with the router.
With officers now convinced David Davies had left his home on the night of Emma's murder, they start to look for more proof.
We'd had inquiry team officers conducting inquiries in Trevor, looking for CCTV, potentially close to his home address. And what that inquiry led us to was a nearby bus depot. They disclosed they had CCTV. We reviewed that CCTV, and actually it showed the movements of a small black hatchback car leaving the area of his home address at about 2 o'clock that morning, travelling out the village of Trevor in the general direction of Penygroes.
Shortly after the car is captured on CCTV, a resident in Penygroes calls 999.
I heard a woman screaming help, basically, and then, like, massive whacks, like somebody was, like, hitting something with it, like a skateboard or something. And then she stopped.
A few minutes later, the same car is captured again on CCTV, which matches the one driven by David Davies.
The murder had taken place, and CCTV picked that car up, travelling back on 2 separate cameras back to the home address in Trevor, arriving back at the home address at about 4:30 a.m.
Police appear to have their man, and David is confronted with the mountain of evidence stacking up against him.
He said he didn't want to make any further disclosure in his interviews and went no comment to all further questions put to him. I'd made the decision that David Davies was to be charged on suspicion of killing Emma Baum.
Charges against David's girlfriend for assisting an offender are dropped. So what may have driven David to murder Emma? And without locating a murder weapon, can police prove this horrific crime was intentional? 24-year-old David Davies has been charged with the murder of his ex-partner Emma Baum in her home in the village of Penygroes. Police still need to build their case against him. A post-mortem reveals Emma was killed with a crowbar, but as yet, police have not found the murder weapon and need to prove David went to Emma's house that night, intending to kill her.
We need to prove that there was intent to kill or cause serious harm. Our case was that this was a premeditated killing, that David Davies had left his address that night knowing damn well that Emma was to be killed. We would argue that he took a weapon with him in order to kill Emma.
Having found no sign of the murder weapon at Emma's house or David's, a search team is dispatched to a beach in Pwllheli, around 30 miles away, after police recall something Davies said in an interview.
Davies said that he left Emma's, went back to his girlfriend's. He said that he'd had trouble sleeping and that he was going to go and take the dog for an early morning walk. This is probably when he sort of dumped his clothes, dumped the murder weapon.
Davies' girlfriend had told police there was a brief time during their early morning walk when they had not been together.
David said he needed to return to the car and told his girlfriend to wait at this location. And that's what he did. And he walked back towards the car. She lost sight of him. He said he was going to the car to pick up an item, didn't say what, and he was out of sight for about 4 to 5 minutes, according to his girlfriend. And this is the location we think that David disposed of the crowbar, and there are a number of places where he could have disposed it. You've got lots of trees, shrubbery as well. It's quite a painstaking and difficult task to find a weapon, but we put a lot of resource in to try and locate it, searching the river. We had underwater search team officers that scoured the riverbed. We also searched the area surrounding the river, but we never actually found the weapon concerned.
With no murder weapon to bolster their case, police need to establish a motive behind the killing and look deeper into the couple's troubled relationship.
Things obviously were rocky, but I think it was when Emma started getting worse and worse. So I think the warning signs were there initially, but he'd never ever physically laid a hand on her, ever, from my knowledge, and she would have told me, she did tell me a lot of that kind of stuff. And then in April, he did lay his hands on her, and she came down to me and she had a bit of a bruise, like a black eye and stuff like that.
With the relationship having turned violent, Emma and David split. But things only got worse for Emma when she tried to move on and met someone new.
She did move on, yeah. And I think that's what Dave didn't like, that she had moved on. He just didn't like seeing her moving on, because he probably thought he basically owned her.
I think it was the control element what flipped in that instant, in that house that night. I think it was the control, because he always had control over her, and I've always said this, he always had control over her, would always click his fingers and she'd come running back. And this time, he clicked his fingers and she didn't go running back, and she was like, no, I'm happy, I'm done, like, no. I think the moment he lost control, that game over. That's all he needed, because he was such a control freak.
Davies had a history of stalking Emma and sort of prowling past her house as much as he could and doing his best to intimidate her. He wanted to know who she was seeing. He was complaining about sort of visitation rights with her son, threatening to gouge her eyes out, saying that she would never see her son again, threatening to kill her.
Tragically, it seemed the relationship had deteriorated so much that Emma had predicted the unimaginable.
She told me that she was getting death threats. So the first thing I said, well, have you been to the police? And she went, yes, I've been to the police. They can't do anything until something's done. So I said to her, do you think you'd do it? She just turned around to me, she goes, he will do it. How can you be that calm knowing that somebody's going to kill you? It was almost like she was at peace with death. It was almost like she had accepted it. So I turned around to her, I said, I'll go round to him and I'll stamp up and down on him for a couple of hours. And I said, I'll make sure that he never goes anywhere near you again. And her response to that was, no. If you go anywhere near him, there's a chance, because of the size of you, you'll kill him. So then we just hugged for about half an hour, told each other how much we loved each other, and that was the last time I seen her.
It was the last time anyone would see Emma Baum. Despite what appears to be overwhelming evidence against him, David Davies was denying first-degree murder. When he appears at Mould Crown Court, there is a surprising twist. He confesses to murder, but denies a premeditated attack.
Davies' account of what happened that night was that he was driving past Emma's house and saw the light on and decided to go in and investigate. According to Davies, they had a sort of conversation that quickly became heated. He claimed that she hit him. He claimed that they had basically fought, and he had reached for this murder weapon, this crowbar, and then blacked out. That he had no memory of what happened next until, apparently, discovering her body the next morning.
He said, I didn't take the weapon with me. That weapon was actually at the back door of Emma's address because I'd used it to take down a shed at the rear of her address and left it there. So it just happened to be there.
The court hears the full horror of what happened at Emma's house on 18th July 2016.
David Davies had left the home address, had travelled directly to Emma's address. He'd somehow got her to come and open the door at the rear of the property.
They argue, and he strikes her with the crowbar before fleeing, leaving her for dead.
He'd returned to the address, told his girlfriend that he'd been playing the Xbox and started to come up with an alibi about his movements.
Davies returns to Emma's house just after 10:30 a.m. the next morning, nearly 7 hours later. But what is truly shocking is he left the scene knowing his 2-year-old son was alone sleeping upstairs. His mother's dead body in the garden.
To know that his son was upstairs and that he'd left his son upstairs that potentially could have seen all this, I literally have no words for it. Like, it's the most heartless thing.
This idea that, you know, this toddler really was wandering around upstairs in the house with his mum lying sort of bludgeoned to death in the back garden. And that was what was really horrific. That was the sort of thing that really made my skin crawl about the whole incident.
After listening to the evidence, the judge accepts that Davies did not go to Emma's house with the intention of killing her, but rather had taken the weapon with the intention of threatening her over custody demands. David Davies is sentenced to 22 years in prison.
You've got Emma's life and the son's life, and it should have been doubled. Like, they should have thrown the book at him because it was so severe. I'd hope that it makes people reevaluate their situations with, you know, with their partners. And I would just say, don't be scared to speak up and get out, because it's never too late. Some people think they're so deep in and they've got so many ties and so much tied down with a set person that there's no getting out or no one will believe them. There'll be someone out there that will be able to prevent this potentially from happening to anyone else out there.
I still find it hard to go to her grave. Things can pop up and remind me, and then you have your little moments where you break down. But it gets easier. It does get easier.
4 years on, Emma's sister Hayley, brother Andrew, and sister-in-law Sarah are slowly coming to terms with life without her.
Emma has always been a massive part in our lives, and she's been the best auntie to our girls. They will never forget their Auntie Emma. We have wonderful memories that we will treasure for the rest of our lives, but we just wish that things were different and that we would have her here with us. Every day we will tell her son that his mummy always loved him and always will, and that he was a little man, her pride and joy. He was her world and she was his. My sister was the best mother in the world, and I'm proud of her for being that. We will always treasure her memory. I love you, Ems, with all my heart and always will. You are my sister, and no one can ever take that away from me. I love you forever.
And Emma's mum, Amanda, will always remember the shining light in her life.
Emma, my beautiful daughter, where do I begin? 27 years ago, you were born, and it was the happiest day of my life. Watching you grow into the woman that you became made me the proudest mother I could ever be. You accomplished so much. College, university, passing your driving test and becoming a mother yourself. You had your whole life ahead of you with your family and beautiful son. But it was tragically taken away from us all at the young age of 22. You weren't only my daughter, you were my best friend. I can't begin to tell you how broken I am. I miss you with all my heart and love you beyond words. You will always be my baby girl in heaven. Love you so much, my Emma. Love you forever. Mam.
How do you solve a case when the witnesses are notoriously distrustful of outsiders, including police? New Murder in Amish Country, Friday at 9 on Sky Crime.